It would be great to stand here and talk about the issues around ethical and social investment from that last member. If it didn't take him so seriously, the fire engine that he drives around Napier every sort of week, I understand it. But look, Mr Speaker, I want to talk a bit about some of the issues why this bill is actually not necessary. Capital markets theory talks about diversification and the issues around the importance of diversification, the importance of invest in a very broad and wide-ranging series of things. And I commend the member, Mr Robertson, for actually coming up with some of these ideas, and I think he's actually thought about an angle which he thought might make some sense. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot of issues in this bill, some of which are taken into account currently, and some of which there are some actually flaws in the bill would actually cause some problems. I'll talk about that, but first I want to talk about some of the issues around why this bill is not needed. You see, Mr Speaker, there was a Labour Party Deputy Prime Minister, the former Minister of Finance, Mr Cullen, who actually, Dr Cullen, he would actually turn around and he was concerned about some of the issues of investment and the nature of the investment. So he put forward certain directives to some of our Crown financial institutions for some of these reasons. For example, he put a directive to the Earthquake Commission about how it should invest its natural disaster fund, in particular, how it should invest best practice portfolio management, maximising return without undue risk, and about avoiding undue reputation to New Zealand as a responsible member of the world community. Mr Speaker, what that basically means is exactly what this bill is designed to take into account. A directive exists already in place for the Earthquake Commission to do essentially what this bill already says. It's a waste of our time, Mr Speaker. Equally, Mr Speaker, there is a particular problem with some of the definitions in the bill. What is ethical investment? What is socially responsible? What is environmentally sustainable? Mr Speaker, there is a lot of definitions and issues around that. What might have been completely appropriate 12 months ago, for example, BP, its name actually branding was Beyond Petroleum, might have been seen as a great place to invest a year ago, where today it's a social pariah. And that's led to a massive drop in its share price as a result. One of the other issues around that is we've seen the ACC, which actually has pretty much one of the most active management portfolios that exist for the Crown, actually put in place some very tight rules about where it should invest its money and where it not. For example, it recently, in the last year or two, has got out of a number of investments which are considered to be inappropriate. For example, it exited from an investment in a company called Lockheed Martin because it was involved in nuclear explosive devices, and it was deemed inappropriate for a Crown operation in New Zealand to have investments in a business like that. But it's a very fine line between what is Lockheed Martin and what is, say, Boeing, Mr Speaker. Over half of Boeing's investment, for example, is taken into account in the defence sector. Is that appropriate or not? Well, some people at a certain time would, exactly, Mr Norman would say, no, that's not appropriate. Other governments, other days would say that is appropriate. So there is a whole lot of problems and issues that exist in some of the definitions in this bill which have not been thought through what it may or may not mean. And I actually think that is actually a sensible thing to actually think about. Maybe the member should think about some of the more details and work with some of the directors and that sit in place to get this put in place. Mr Speaker, the bill actually does put in place some ideas around some of those definitions, around international conventions and things like that. And I think, I commend the member to that. But at what stage would actually this happen? I mean, would we invest in oil companies, for example, and extractive industries? Well, in New Zealand, that's been some of the fastest growing returns to New Zealand. A company that I'm on record as being a shareholder in, for example, has recently increased about 400% in the last 5 years. And I think that's a belief where we are ruling out certain types of investment at the problematic for our good, hard-working Kiwi mums and dads who are worried about their investments and their investments in Crown enterprises. They would actually lost 1 or 2% of their returns simply because if this bill got tightened to an extent where those definitions were far too tight. I do like the idea of some of the issues that Mr Norman pointed out about the issues around the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think it's a good fund. It's got some merit. But what I do say is that its money came from what some would say would be socially irresponsible investment. It got its money from mining, in particular oil fields. And this day and age, that seemed to be not necessarily a good place to have your money, Mr Speaker. So and if we actually rule out those sort of things, we will be in a position where we would make New Zealand poorer for whatever reasons what it may be. So, Mr Speaker, I think it's great the members had this bill pulled out of the ballot. I haven't had the great luck of doing that yet, and I think I commend the member to be able to actually have some of these ideas come through. My bill's been in the ballot for about nearly 2 years, Mr Robertson, since we won't talk about that while I was here. But look, I do believe, Mr Speaker, this is a superfluous bill, but it does take into account it exists in the moment. It's a situation where...
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. His time has expired. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I rise to take a call.